In 2013, the US government launched a website. They had 3 years to build it, over 600 million in funding, hundreds of contractors, and on launch day, it fell apart almost instantly. Errors everywhere, accounts failing. At one point, the number of people who successfully enrolled in the first 24 hours was reportedly in the single digits. 6 people out of millions. Now, you might think the disaster came from bad code, bad engineers, bad luck. It didn't. It came from a bad process, one where the plan was treated as sacred, even as reality kept contradicting it. The fix, when it came, didn't involve a major redesign or a new team of geniuses. A small group came in, broke the work into short weekly cycles, shipped tiny improvements every day, and measured what actually worked. 6 weeks later, the site was functional. They didn't follow a new plan. They stopped trusting plans so much and started trusting feedback instead. That shift has a name. It changed the entire software industry. I'm Yukari Esther, and this is NeuroBloom, where we make complex technology actually understandable. So, if that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you'd like to directly support future videos, you can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee. So, with that said, let's dive into it. Before we talk about Agile, we need to understand what it was replacing, because the old approach wasn't invented by people who hated developers. It made complete sense for a different industry. In the 1950s, General Motors had perfected the assembly line. The logic was clean. Design the car, build the factory, manufacture the car, ship the car. Each phase finished before the next begins. No going back, no improvising. Waterfall, they called it. And when software engineers first needed a process, they borrowed this one. Requirements first, design second, code third, test fourth, ship last. On paper, flawless. In practice, catastrophic. The problem is that software isn't still. You can change software. You can redesign a feature in an afternoon. The raw material, logic and code bends. The waterfall model treated it like it didn't. So, teams would spend 6 months gathering every possible requirement, document everything, get signs off from 17 stakeholders, and then build for another 6 months. By the time the thing shipped, half the requirements had changed. The market shifted. Users wanted something else. The business had pivoted. And the team had to pretend their 1,200-page spec was still relevant. The longer you go without real feedback, the more expensive your mistakes become. That's the core problem. Not bad engineers, not bad managers. A process that kept everyone isolated from reality for as long as possible. Then delivery that reality all at once. Too late to do anything about it. February 2001, Snowbird, Utah. 17 software developers checked into a mountain resort to argue professionally, productively, and with a shared sense that the whole industry was broken. They had widely different backgrounds. Some wrote books, some had invented their own frameworks. They disagreed on almost everything. 3 days later, they produced a document with 4 values and 12 principles. They call it the Agile Manifesto. No 300-page manual, no certification program, no vendor deal. Just this. Working software matters more than exhaustive documentation. People matter more than rigid process. Collaborating with customers matters more than negotiating contracts. Responding to change matters more than following a plan. Notice, the manifesto doesn't say plans are useless. It says when you are forced to choose adaptability. That's a value shift, and value shifts change behavior. The group included names you'd recognize if you move in software circles. Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, Ward Cunningham, the person who invented the wiki, which is a fun bit of trivia. Between them, they've seen decades of projects fail the same way, for the same reason. The name Agile itself was almost different, by the way. The leading alternative was lightweight development, which, let's be honest, would not have made for nearly as many LinkedIn posts. The first practical idea Agile gave us is probably the most counterintuitive. Don't build the whole thing, build a small slice, ship it, learn from it, repeat. This cycle is called a sprint, typically 2 weeks. And why 2 weeks specifically? Because it hits a sweet spot that's hard to find anywhere else. Long enough to actually finish something real, short enough that if you are going in the wrong direction, you find out before you've wasted a month on it. And short enough that there's nowhere to hide. If someone's stuck, 2 weeks surfaces. You can quietly kick a problem down the road when the road only goes 2 weeks. Think about sonar on a submarine. You don't navigate by memorizing the ocean floor in advance. You send a pulse, wait for what bounces back, update your picture, send another pulse. Every sprint is a pulse. Every sprint builds a more accurate map of the problem you are solving. Take Sophia, a product manager building a food delivery app. The old approach would have her spend months defining every feature, restaurant lights, payments, tracking, reviews, before writing a single line of code. Instead, she asks the team one question at the start of each sprint. What's the single most important thing we can learn or build in the next 2 weeks? Sprint 1. Users can browse restaurants and places a basic order. Rough, incomplete, but real. 15 users try it. They don't browse restaurants. They search for specific dishes. Not show me Thai food. I want pad Thai. Nobody on the team had anticipated this. It wasn't in any requirement doc. 15 real people clicking around a real app showed them in an afternoon. Discovered 2 weeks in that finding cost almost nothing to act on. Discovered 6 months in, it means re-architecting something the team is already emotionally attached to. And the teams that have spent 6 months on something will rationalize why the users are wrong before they will accept that their assumption was. The sprint doesn't just speed things up, it keeps mistakes cheap. The second big idea in Agile came from a place nobody expected, Toyota 1953. Nagoya. Engineer Taiichi Ono had a production problem. American factories at the time were push systems. Manufacture as much as possible and push it forward through the pipeline. The logic being never let the line go idle. Ono thought this was wasteful. Parts sitting in a pipe waiting to be assembled aren't progress. They're expensive stagnation, so he invented the whole thing Nothing gets made until something downstream actually needs it. He called the system Kanban, from Japanese words meaning visual and card. The physical implementation, a board divided into columns, cards representing units of work. Work flows left to right. To do, in progress, done. Critically, each column had a limit on how many cards could be in it at once. That limit, the YIP limit, is the secret ingredient. It forces the team to finish things before starting new things. And when the in progress column is always full, that's not productivity. It's a symptom. Something stuck. Software teams discovered Kanban decades later, and it mapped almost perfectly. Instead of car parts, the cards became features. Instead of assembly stations, the columns became development stages. Backlog, in progress, review, done. Walk into almost any tech company today and you will see some version of this. Physical sticky notes on a whiteboard, digital cards in Jira, or Linear or Trello. All of it tracked back on Ono and a car factory in 1953. The deeper insight Kanban gives you, the most productive state for a team isn't everyone is busy. It's everything is flowing. There's a difference. Busy often means lots of things started. Flowing means things are actually getting done. Agile teams are usually organized through a framework called Scrum. Scrum has 3 roles. Remove any of them and the whole structure wobble. First, the product owner. This person holds the vision. They manage the backlog, the prioritized list of everything the product could do. Their job isn't to dictate how features get built. It's to make sure the team is always working on the right thing in the right order. Second, the Scrum Master. Think of them like a gardener, someone who doesn't make the plants grow, but removes the rocks, pull the weeds, makes sure the conditions are right. They facilitate the process, protect the team from distractions during a sprint, and ask the uncomfortable questions nobody else wants to raise. Third, the development team. Cross-functional, self-organizing, typically 5 to 9 people. Developers, designers, testers, whoever is needed to ship the thing. They collectively decide how to do the work. Nobody assigns tasks from above. This self-organization sounds chaotic. In practice, it's powerful because the people closest to the problem make the decisions about the problem. The dysfunctional always appears when the roles blur. A product owner who micromanages implementation, a Scrum Master who acts like a manager, a development team that doesn't push back when scope creep starts. Each of those is a leak in the structure. Enough leaks, and the whole framework stops working, even if you are doing every ceremony correctly. Every morning, across millions of office and remote calls, software developers answer 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What I'm doing today? Is anything blocking me? 50 minutes standing up. The standing part isn't arbitrary. It's a nudge. People in comfortable chairs has no incentive to end a meeting. People on their feet do. Stand-up gets made fun of constantly. We need a meeting to discuss the meeting schedule. Fair. Done poorly. It's theater. Done well. It's one of the most valuable 15 minutes a team can spend. Here's what it actually does. It creates shared awareness. When you hear your teammates say, "I'm working on the payment module today," your brain files that away. Later, when you hit something payment related, you don't open a ticket and wait 3 days. You just ask. Without daily sync, invisible work accumulates. 2 engineers built the same thing without knowing it. Someone's blocked for 4 days before anyone noticed. A bad assumption bakes itself into the codebase unchallenged. In distributed systems, there's a concept called a gossip protocol. Nodes in a network share information by each one telling a few neighbors, who tell neighbors until eventually everyone knows. It's fast, low overhead, and surprisingly resilient. A daily stand-up is a gossip protocol for humans. Fast, low cost, effective at keeping a team operating from roughly the same picture of reality. Every sprint ends with 2 events. The sprint review, where the team shows what they built to stakeholders. Real software actually working in front of real people. The sprint retrospective at this one is less celebrated but arguably more valuable. The retro is where the team gathers, just the team, no executives, and asks what went well, what didn't, what we'll do differently next time. It sounds simple. The compounding effect is not. Picture a team 3 months into Agile. They've been doing all the ceremonies, but something is quickly wrong. Developers feel like requirements are always vague. The product owners think the team consistently underestimates effort. The QA person feels like testability is never considered during design. None of this gets said in stand-ups. None of it shows up in sprint reviews. It's just a low-level hum of friction slowing everyone down. The retrospective is where it finally gets said. First hetero, polite surface level. Second hetero, the vague requirements issue surfaces. Third hetero, they've agreed on a new working norm. Any item added to the sprint must include at least 3 concrete examples of expected behavior before engineering touches it. 3 months later, the team is measurably faster. Not because of new tools, not because they hired more people, because they've got slightly better at working together every 2 weeks. The sprint is a learning loop about the product. The retrospective is a learning loop about the team building the product. Both matter. Teams that skip the retros tend to repeat the same friction, sprint after sprint, wondering why things never quite improve. There's something that happens in organizations that have heard Agile is good but aren't quite sure why. They adopt all the rituals, 2-week sprint, daily stand-ups, Kanban boards, retrospectives, the full ceremony wardrobe. The results don't change. This has a name, ScrumBut. We use Scrum, but our sprints are really just monthly release windows. We use Scrum, but the product owner is never available during the sprint. We use Scrum, but retrospectives cut because we don't have time. Each but is a hole in the hull. The ship looks like a ship. It still sinks. Agile rituals without the underlying values are cosplay. The ceremonies are containers. They only work when filled with the right things. Honest feedback, genuine collaboration, the psychological safety to say, this isn't working without it being a career risk. The last one is harder than it sounds. A retrospective where nobody says what they actually think is worse than no retrospective at all. It creates the illusion of reflection without any of the substance. The real problem stays hidden longer. Agile doesn't promise an easy process. It promises a more honest one. And honestly, in organizations tends to be the part that requires the most deliberate effort. Let's bring it together. Software is a learning problem, not just an execution problem. The biggest risk in any product isn't technical complexity, it's building the wrong thing for too long before anyone finds out. Agile is a system designed to surface that discovery as fast and as cheaply as possible. The sprint gives you a 2-week feedback cycle. Instead of shipping once after months of work, you ship something small. Show it to real people. Learn what's true and adjust. Every iteration narrows the gap between what you think users want and what they actually want. The Kanban board makes invisible work visible. Cards on a board with YIP limits force the team to finish things before starting new ones and expose bottlenecks before they become crises. The 3 Scrum roles divide the responsibility cleanly. The product owner owns what gets built and why. The Scrum Master owns how the team works together, and the development team owns how they build it. Blur those lines and the system stops working. The daily stand-up keeps the team operating from a shared map. 15 minutes, 3 questions, surprisingly effective at preventing the kind of invisible miscommunication that costs days. The retrospective, it's where the team gets smarter, not just learning about the product, learn about themselves as a team. Small improvements, compounding every 2 weeks. None of this is magic. Done without genuine values behind it, adaptability, collaboration, continuous improvement, it becomes theater. The ceremonies look right, but the results don't come. Agile works when it changes how people actually think about uncertainty, not just how they schedule their calendar. The organizations that do it well don't treat Agile as a methodology to follow. They treat it as a way of seeing the problem. A small detail that didn't make it into the main story. When the 17 developers at Snowbird were choosing a name for their manifesto, Agile wasn't the obvious winner. The frontrunner for a while was lightweight development. It was developer Mike Biddle who pushed for Agile. He'd been thinking about complex adaptive systems and liked the connotation of both speed and flexibility. The group voted Agile won. If Biddle had stayed quiet, the entire software industry might be running lightweight retrospectives and attending lightweight conferences, which, let's be real, would have had much lower attendance. So, your turn. Think about the last project you worked on where the original plan didn't survive contact with reality, where something you built for months turned out to miss the point, where the users wanted something you'd never thought to ask about. That gap between the plan and what's true is exactly what Agile is designed to close. Drop your story in the comments. What broke? What did you wish you'd done differently? If you want more of this, real technology concepts explained with actual depth and no filler, subscribe and hit the bell. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one. Bye!